I'd like to welcome Rachel Dreskin, the CEO of the Plant-Based Foods Association, and Renee Smith-Nickerson, Policy Associate for the Plant-Based Food Association.
Hello.
Hello. All right. And I'm going to do my best not to cough through this.
Oh, no.
All right, perfect. So welcome, both of you. It's a pleasure to have you both here with me up on stage. To start out with, Rachel, I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more, set the stage with us on the intel on the current market size and consumer demand for plant-based foods?
Sure. First of all, pleasure to be here, and looking forward to connecting with people after the sessions as well. So the plant-based foods industry, what has been going on with the industry in recent years, there's been a tremendous amount of hype and attention on plant-based foods, very positive, and then recently some negative attention on plant-based foods. So how has this resulted in overall positioning of the industry and the sales? So sales for plant-based foods are demonstrating a lot of resilience. Right now, in 2022, retail sales for plant-based foods reached $8 billion. So a tremendous amount of growth over recent years. That's up from $7.4 billion in 2021, which is a little bit less growth than we had seen in years previous. But it's important to note that the increase from 7.4 to 8 billion is in large part due to inflation. But also the dollar share and unit share for plant-based foods has remained steady during that period, even taking inflation into account. So the dollar and unit share has stayed steady at 4.5%. And this is really notable. And the word that keeps coming to my head around this is resilience, because the industry of plant-based foods is a smaller industry, and it is still in a more nascent stage. So with inflation and supply network disruptions, the plant-based foods industry has weathered and will continue to weather a tremendous amount of challenges that impact an industry of this size and maturity much more. And to speak really quickly, I know we're focused on retail here, but to paint a broader picture, in food service, there has been a lot of growth in food service for plant-based foods. We surveyed food service operators, and 4 times the amount of operators said that they were planning to increase the options of plant-based foods on their menus in 2023 and beyond, and those that said they were going to keep it steady or remove it. Also important to note, and this is very relevant for retail, is e-commerce sales. So in 2022, sales of plant-based foods increased by 10%. Sales increase in conventional retail grew by 6.4%. So we saw almost 4% increased sales in e-commerce, which to us demonstrates that if you take out the shelf and merchandising limitations, that consumer demand is even beyond what we see in conventional retail right now.
Right. No pun intended, right? With Beyond Burger.
The puns are endless.
Great. So what do you think are some of the barriers that are facing the plant food-based industry?
So the biggest barrier that I would say right now, I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. One is that the plant-based foods industry is starting off from an uneven playing field. So if you look at conventional animal and dairy and egg products, there is a huge amount of support that goes into those systems, and largely from a government, from a policy standpoint. So there are subsidies that support these industries, subsidies that support the grain, the feed that goes into feeding the animals. There's crop insurance that supports these industries. It's very different from the kind of crop insurance for specialty crops that largely go into the plant-based foods industry. There are checkoff programs, right? So, for example, in 2021, there's one company called Dairy Management Inc. Out of Rosemont, Illinois, that spent $160 million promoting the interests of the dairy industry. Now, to draw this, that's a huge number. The marketing budget for Barbie was $150 million. So the amount of money that's getting funneled in through the checkoff program, which of course comes from producers, also comes from USDA directly, is absolutely tremendous. And these programs have been built up over the past 40 years. The introduction of the beef and pork checkoff was in the 1985, part of the 1985 Farm Bill. So the plant-based foods industry does not benefit from the same kind of support and incentives. So there's a lot of work for us to do to be able to come together as an industry, but also engage policymakers so that we can create a more even playing field for the plant-based foods industry to succeed and thrive.
Great. It just doesn't seem fair, no?
It's not, and it's up to us to be able to address it and create some solutions.
Why there's a place for you guys. So I'm going to shift a little bit to more of the policy perspective. Renee, do you think a market-based approach is going to solve our food systems issues?
Yeah, I think a market-based approach plays a significant role, but it's not a silver bullet to really solving our issues in our food system. Some successes we have seen are particularly in the realm of innovation. I'm sure in your grocery stores, you can probably think of at least 20 different plant-based products for any category. Most recently, we've seen a really increase in market value around creamers for all you fancy coffee drinkers out there.
I love my pumpkin spice oat milk creamer.
I'm sure in that realm of innovation, we've been able to see plant-based food products meeting consumer demand and interest when it comes to nutrition and flavor. And when it comes to sourcing specifically, innovation has really shown that that companies are less relying on your staple crops and ingredients such as wheat, soy, coconut, but really getting a lot more creative. And with that, those unique ingredients are now going into the plant-based food industry, being staples for sourcing, but also just introducing consumers to new tastes, to new crops, new products, and it's really expanding our industry. And when it comes to pricing, also in light of market-based approach, that innovation has really been able to sort of shift where price parity is a priority. And price parity is more so reflected really when it comes to meat and dairy in particular. And it's important to consumers to find that because as they look for plant-based alternatives to that key portion what's on their plates.
Yeah.
And in the realm of sustainability, the market has shown that certification programs, concise labeling, really help consumers make informed decisions, especially when it comes to their food purchases that align with ethical or environmental considerations. And additionally, brands are really working hard to meet that nutrition standards and dietary diversity that consumers have come to rely on to need to cater to their needs. But there's definitely limitations that exist, and which is why a more systems-based approach is something that PBFA and PBFI are really supporting our brands and expanding. So markets can exacerbate inequalities in terms of access to food, as well as economic disparities. Folks that may not be able to afford or have access to plant-based food products for nutritional or cultural reasons really contribute to food insecurity in communities. And then additionally, as businesses grow to seek viability and satisfy investors, the short-term focus on profit maximization can sacrifice those long-term sustainability and opportunities for resilience. Interestingly enough, what we're learning from policymakers is that the current decentralized nature of the plant-based food industry reflects resilience and really are taking lessons learned from hyper-consolidation industries and that sort of decentralized model and the example of resilience offers a logical solution to policymakers to our food systems issues. So a lot of them are like, yes, we appreciate the disruptor attitude, but as our policymakers are seeking what's going to have long-term longevity and support just greater industries, that logical perspective of at least there is a wealth of different companies approaching this work really matters. And so with that, I think it's also important to recognize that when making food choices, consumers don't just make decisions off price, taste, and convenience. And even though those are really critical pillars, it's not the full story. Food is deeply, deeply personal, and we must tap into that sort of emotional driver in efforts to support our growing consumer base. So really, in essence, moving away from a solely marketplace approach and really now incorporating a more holistic systems approach can really look at excuse me, can help us tackle some of those challenges to our global food systems issues like food insecurity, nutrition, climate change, and food waste.
Great. So expanding on that, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about the current mechanisms that support business in incorporating equitable business practices?
Yeah, definitely. So the plant-based food industry is really unique because it has that proximity to health and nutrition and also addressing some climate issues as well. But with that adjacency to those positive impacts, we see that there's an opportunity to advance social progress as well. And by centering equitable business practices, we all can be a part of the solution to better supporting people and the planet. So some programs that currently exist that have been really successful are supplier diversity programs, which increase access and investment in diverse businesses, whether it be culturally, geographically, ethnically, or even gender diverse. And these supplier diversity programs not only address social responsibility, but also offer a competitive edge to brands and can support consumers in their choices. And I think it's really important to also think of these supplier diverse programs as a way to expand our channels and pool for suppliers that we can work with. And by engaging in these more, it really creates sustainability for these programs to become a staple. And consumers are looking for their brands to be more conscious as they are being more conscious spenders.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I did some research previously with a colleague at MIT, and we found that diverse suppliers have the ability to be far more agile. And I would think in an industry like this, that ability to be more agile and be more flexible, I mean, that's so key.
Yeah, absolutely. In response to the pandemic, I'm sure many, businesses and suppliers had a really hard time thinking where they were going to be able to meet some of their needs. And PBFI and PBFA were able to work very intimately with domestic growers and domestic suppliers to support the needs of our brands that could no longer rely on some of their global partnerships.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have another question. This is for both of you. I'm going to start with Rachel, and then I'll have Renee, you comment too. So what do you think is the business case for sustainable sourcing that prioritize regenerative agriculture and equity?
Yes, and I'm going to note also just one small build on the conversation you're just having around supplier diversity, because I think this also connects in with the business case as well. But in addition to having a more diverse supplier base, there is increased agility, and there also, importantly, I think, is greater representation of the folks who are interested in plant-based foods, which is really important.
Right, because they have the passion.
Yes.
You need to see the passion.
Yes, and plant-based foods are not just one thing for one type of consumer.
Right.
This is something that is appealing across cultures, across geographic areas. So being able to foster an industry that is more diverse is hence more representative of what consumers are looking for and who makes up that consumer base. So I think that ties directly into your question around the business case. So there's one, I think, strong business case there. I will also mention that, and my colleague Renee had touched on this already, so I'll expand on it a bit, but within the PBFA, we represent over 300 members, and it has been a challenging period over the past couple of years for sure. And there has been a lot of supply network disruption, a lot of volatility, and this has impacted the businesses quite considerably. And when you are relying on global supply networks, everyone in this room knows how much more complicated that can get. And we have, with the domestic sourcing work that Renee was just speaking to, we are thinking, is there going to be interest from our company members in sourcing ingredients more domestically? Because of course there are a whole lot of questions that we had talked about, the lack of policy and government support around plant-based foods, and is this going to be something that's thought of as more expensive or unattainable? And actually, we had a huge amount of interest from our company members because they were saying the amount of disruptions it's creating for our business to rely on these complex global supply networks makes it very appealing for us to look at how do we foster more domestic supply, more resilient supply? How do we increase our transparency over our supply within our supply network? And also, there is a push from consumers as well, of course, who are more interested than ever. There's been a push for transparency over the past 10 or 12 years since we've started to track this. That continues. Consumers are more interested in knowing where their food comes from, and even in a plant-based food product that contains multiple ingredients, they want to know where those ingredients come from. So we see this as a trend that is only going to continue as well. And the last thing I'll note on this is also some of the buyer interest in supply chain resilience and transparency and more localized sourcing where appropriate. But we're working with some buyer partners that are saying, this is an opportunity for us to be able to communicate with our consumers and help them understand where these products come from. And they're proactively looking, and they're starting to ask us some questions saying, can you share the brands that are looking at sustainable and regenerative sourcing practices so that we can start connecting with them and thinking about how do we bring these messages to shelf? Because that also creates a differentiation in the market for the buyer, for the retailer.
Yeah, absolutely. And to close the point on that note, the benefits of regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture really can be seen on the farm, as far as in terms of lower input costs. And it's a balance that requires increased crop rotation, crop diversity, integrated pest management, and really fortifying of the soil, and other opportunities that denote the complementary growing as well. Our system of monocropping is not really going to sustain us into the future, and so the need to think of farming as a way to not only offer greater crop diversity, but ecological diversity to the earth and planet, will in turn have greater return on investment. And though it's a hard concept to kind of wrap our head around as to how we think we're going to meet the demand, I think that's where creativity and partnership really comes into play. The Plant-Based Food Initiative Institute launched its Sustainable Sourcing Initiative a few years ago, and it really aims to create an ecosystem of producers, suppliers, manufacturers, and brands to work together to solve some of those deeper environmental issues. And we've seen success. We've got pilots that are going into production and sort of growing in scale for themselves. So while I think there's an opportunity to see real solutions translate from the farm to the marketplace.
Okay, good. All right, so I have one last question for you, Rachel. Let's get down to the...
You are a champ for getting through this,
really
by the way.
I'm not dying, guys, I promise. Okay, so realistically, let's be real. How much influence can a business, a brand, a buyer, all these people out in the audience, how can they have their influence in driving food system transformation?
Yes. So this, I think, is one of the biggest and most important questions for us.
What can they take away?
And one thing I'll note is just from personal experience, I've been working with major food companies in and outside of the plant-based space for the past 10, 12 years or so, and the amount of companies that have said to me, we really have no influence over the supply network, over the value chain, has been tremendous. And even the biggest players in the space that they operate in have said, we don't have the power and the control. But I also have seen that when a company takes a step forward and says, we are going to do this, and they bring the right people along with them, massive changes have happened. One example, I know before I worked in plant-based food space, I was working in animal welfare and working on implementing higher welfare standards for animals in supply networks. Oh, wow. So, have worked with McDonald's on creating a cage-free egg policy. And, being able to do that work with McDonald's and with other companies in the space has resulted in the entire industry in the US moving to cage-free. We are almost at 50% cage-free in the US, which was in the single digits just 5 years ago. It's absolutely incredible. And that took a couple of companies really stepping out and doing it. But that's also not to say that any one player, no matter how big they are, can do this alone. We need frameworks in place. We need partnerships. And there also needs to be third parties who are willing to do that as well. So that's a very important part of the work for PBFA and PBFI. Within the Plant-Based Foods Institute, there's a program which Renee is very involved in, and it is called our Sustainable Sourcing Initiative. And we actually just sent out a communication to all of our membership just before this panel today, inviting folks to take part in a sustainable sourcing summit. That will happen virtually in November of this year, so invite you all to participate should you be interested. Our website is pbfinstitute.org. But we invite everybody to, in this initiative or other initiatives, to really think about how do we forge strategic partnerships? What are the frameworks that we can put in place to create a pathway forward? Align on where we want to go to, but really focus on collaboration. And I think third parties serving a facilitatory role in this so that we can have that pre-competitive dialogue in a safe space is going to be critical to us getting the work done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect place to end this panel and end this morning. If any of you have any questions for Renee or Rachel, you're welcome to come up. But I hate being the person that stands between people and lunch, so I've committed to making sure that we're on time, and now we're 30 seconds over. So please go enjoy the very appropriate lunch, which is vegetarian, I've heard. I'm very excited to try it and network and enjoy having a wonderful lunch with each other, and then come back at 1 o'clock. Thank you all.